Today, we're talking about something called the obsidian mirror. It's really a story about how our invisible beliefs, the things we hold to be true deep down, can have very real and sometimes very, very powerful consequences in the world.
I mean, what a way to start, right? Just picture this. We're not in some dusty library. We're in a room, it's late, and one of the smartest, most respected minds of the entire Elizabethan age is about to try something, well, something pretty extraordinary.
And this man, who was right at the heart of power, was none other than Queen Elizabeth I's trusted advisor, a man named John Dee.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. John Dee was this total paradox. On one hand, he wasn't some fringe conspiracy theorist. He was a genius mathematician, a top-tier cartographer. He's actually the guy who came up with the term British Empire. But on the other hand, he spent a huge chunk of his life scrying, gazing into reflective objects to get visions, and having what he called angelic conversations. See, for him, science and magic weren't enemies. They were just two different paths up the same mountain, two ways of trying to figure out the universe.
So how did this whole thing actually work? Well, Dee partnered up with his occultist, Edward Kelly. Kelly was the scryer. He'd be the one staring into a black obsidian mirror, describing what he saw. And Dee, being the scientist, would sit right there, taking incredibly detailed notes of everything. And get this wasn't just some personal spiritual quest. Dee genuinely believed the angels were giving him a divine plan to reform all of Christianity. He saw this as a project of the absolute highest political importance.
So let's zoom out from Dee for a minute, because his story is really the launchpad for the main idea we're exploring here, something we can call the invisible architecture of history.
So here's the big question. What if all those stories we tell ourselves about the unseen world, angels, fate, prophecy, what if they're not just stories? What if they actually form a sacred map that powerful people have used for centuries to make huge decisions about war, politics, and the future of their countries?
Now, to really get inside Dee's head, you have to understand this idea of the magus. This was kind of the ideal scholar back in the Renaissance. They believed that our material world and the spiritual world were just mirror images of each other. And if you were smart enough, if you studied math and alchemy and ritual, you could learn the secret language connecting them. And then you couldn't just understand the universe. You could actually influence it.
And this idea just exploded in the 1600s with something called the Rosicrucian Manifestos. All of a sudden, these pamphlets appeared, announcing a secret brotherhood of enlightened masters who were invisibly guiding Europe towards this massive transformation. The crazy part? Nobody could ever actually find a Rosicrucian. But that almost made the idea even more powerful. This belief in a hidden hand shaping history was really starting to take root.
And this pattern, this deep-seated belief in hidden forces, it doesn't just stop there. It keeps echoing down through the centuries, popping up in some of the most surprising places you can imagine.
You can just see the thread running through time here. It starts with Dee talking to angels. Then you get the mystery of the Rosicrucians, which leads to these huge Victorian secret societies like the Golden Dawn. And then, believe it or not, it goes all the way up to World War II, where magical thinking literally made its way into the war rooms on both sides.
You'd think that the age of science, with all its industry and machines, would have killed off these kinds of beliefs. But in a lot of ways, it actually supercharged them. People were just starving for some kind of meaning that rational materialism couldn't give them. And that led to this huge boom in everything from spiritualism to complex ritual magic.
And these groups weren't just full of weirdos in basements. I mean, look at the membership of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. You've got W.B. Yeats, a Nobel Prize-winning poet. You've got the guy who co-created the tarot deck that basically everyone uses today. These were influential, serious people looking for serious answers.
Which brings us to World War II. And this is where it gets absolutely wild. In the middle of the most modern, technological war the world had ever seen, you had German naval officers using pendulums on maps to try and find Allied ships. Hitler's own deputy, Rudolf Hess, was deeply into astrology. And on the Allied side, British intelligence actually hired their own astrologer to try and predict what the Nazis would do. It's just incredible.
So this isn't just some weird historical footnote. This whole dynamic of belief directly shaping action is, you could argue, more obvious and powerful today than ever before, especially when you look at geopolitics.
So here's the core idea for the modern day. What if, for many world leaders and the millions of people who support them, religious belief isn't just talk? What if it's the actual operating system they're running? the basic code that shapes how they see the world and what they try to do in it.
And this chart just lays it out so clearly. You can see how these very different theological beliefs lead to very specific, concrete political goals. For some Christian Zionists, supporting certain policies in Israel is a necessary step for the Second Coming to happen. For some religious Zionists, settling land is about actively speeding up a messianic age. And in Iran, the whole structure of government is based on the idea of preparing the way for a hidden spiritual leader to return. These aren't just ideas, they are political roadmaps.
And you really can't get a more concrete example than this. When the U.S. decided to move its embassy to Jerusalem, for a huge and influential group of people, this wasn't just a foreign policy move. They saw it and they celebrated it as a literal fulfillment of biblical prophecy happening in their lifetimes.
So, the big question is, why? Why does this pattern show up again and again, from a 16th century magician to 21st century politics? What is the engine that lets belief have such a huge impact on the real world?
I think the main takeaway is this. If we try to understand history by only looking at economics or rational political moves, we are going to miss the point over and over again. We're completely ignoring that invisible architecture, the framework of belief that for millions of people is the most real and motivating thing there is.
And here's basically how it works, broken down into a few steps. First, we're all looking for a story that makes sense of this chaotic world. So, second, we build these sacred stories that give our lives meaning. Third, those stories make it okay, even necessary, to do things that might look totally irrational from the outside. And finally, when a whole lot of people start acting together based on that shared belief, boom, they change the course of history. That's how it happens.
At the end of the day, it really does come back to this incredibly powerful metaphor. The belief framework isn't just a set of ideas you think about sometimes. It's the operating system. It's the deep, underlying code that's running all the time, processing everything you see and determining what you do about it.
So really, whether you're John Dee in the 1500s trying to get messages from angels to advise his queen, or a modern lobbyist pushing for a specific policy because of an end-times prophecy, the fundamental human project is exactly the same. It's about finding and living inside a story that's powerful enough to make you act.
You know, John Dee's obsidian mirror, it's sitting in a museum now. It's just an artifact behind glass, a relic from what we like to think was a more superstitious time. But that leaves us with a really important question. The mirror might be in a museum, but that human need to gaze into it, to search for meaning and purpose in an invisible world, that's still very much with us. So the question is, what invisible mirrors are we all looking into today?